We've got some regression candidates for you here on Fantasy Football Today Express. All right, Dave. So regression, we're talking about regression to the mean. We're not necessarily talking about players who are going to get worse. They could regress up toward their mean. But with that being said, Dave, give me start it off with a spicy regression candidate.
How about James Cook as a regression candidate? 18 touchdowns last year. When's the last time you remember a Buffalo Bills running back getting 8 touchdowns in a season, especially with Josh Allen? I think it might have happened once. But 18 touchdowns for James Cook, can he do that again? I find it tough to believe. And we also know that he wants a new contract. What if he holds out? What if he holds in? There's a lot of things in play that make me a little bit nervous about James Cook not being quite as good as he was last year.
Yeah. So where are you comfortable drafting him? He had 16 rushing and 2 receiving touchdowns. He had 1,267 total yards in 16 games. So let's call him a 1,300 yard, player.
Do you want a crazy stat on him?
Yeah.
40.5% of his PPR fantasy points came just from his touchdowns. Like
that's got to be among the leaders.
Right. Oh, I mean, I believe he was the leader.
Okay.
There's like another running back that had like 52%. He played in one game. It was Tony Jones, 38% for Nick Chubb. But you get the point. I would love to get James Cook in round 3. I don't want to reach for him. I don't think that he's somebody who should be reached for. And I think he's absolutely a guy who could disappoint.
Yeah, I mean, you think about some players who scored 16 rushing touchdowns. Jahmyr Gibbs was the number 2 running back per game. Derrick Henry was the number 3 running back per game. James Cook was the number 11 running back per game, and he only had 32 catches in 16 games. All right, give me another regression candidate. That was a good one to start.
Baker Mayfield is one you've been tooting your horn for. 44 total touchdowns for him last year. Tough to imagine that he'll get back to that this year, even though the receiving core, at least on paper, looks better than it did a year ago. But you've got to wonder if Chris Godwin is going to be the Chris Godwin we saw last year. How quickly can Ibuka step up if Godwin's out? Is Mike Evans going to be the same guy? Speaking of guys that scored a lot of touchdowns to push up their fantasy numbers, is he going to be the same guy? Is the offensive line going to be the same? Our defense is going to be more dialed into Baker Mayfield. And there's a new play caller. There's a lot that could go wrong, which is why Baker, top 10 fantasy quarterback, I think we can draft him that way, but he's falling so far that you almost want to get him as a good value and not somebody that you target.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'd like to call him a bust candidate, but he does fall pretty far. So I don't think, he's not being drafted like a guy who finished 3rd at the position last year. But the 2 areas of regression that I'm looking at, 22.2 rushing yards per game. His previous career high was 10.3. And Baker Mayfield also had a 7.2 touchdown rate, 7.2% touchdown rate. He's had a few years where he's been over 5, but his career average is 5%. So I just don't think he's throwing 41 touchdowns. I don't know that he's going to throw more than 32. That would be a really good season. But the rushing yards, and I think he throws so many dangerous balls that are either intercepted or almost intercepted. He led the NFL in fumbles last year, and I think he lost only 2 of 13. So I see a lot of pitfalls for Baker Mayfield, specifically the negative plays. Throw on top of that Chris Godwin coming off the dislocated ankle, Mike Evans being 32 years old. I don't see myself drafting a ton of Baker Mayfield, even though he's been very good for now a year and a half. All right, we're going to take a break and give you a few more regression candidates on FFT Express. And I think Terry McLaurin is a really interesting call, Dave. He had his best season, and a lot of it was the touchdowns.
We are used to McLaurin getting like between 4 and 6 touchdowns a season. And last year with Jaden Daniels, he just bombarded the end zone. He was all over the place. 29% of his PPR fantasy points came from touchdowns. So it's very, you could very easily see him still have 7, 8 touchdowns, and that's good. But is his yardage going to pop or his targets going to go up? They just had a Deebo Samuel. It's a second season for Jaden Daniels. We've seen a lot of quarterbacks regress in their second season. It makes me nervous to cannonball into pools for Terry McLaurin kind of want to get him as more of like a settle for number 2 wide receiver and not a guy kind of like what I was saying about Cook. I don't want to target him. I want to settle for him a little bit later on in the draft if I'm going to get him at all.
And like James Cook, who was RB11, I think I said, per game with those touchdowns, 16 rushing, 2 receiving. Terry McLaurin was RB16 per game with 13 touchdowns. So you definitely need more targets. He only had 117 in 17 games. You definitely need more targets from him. I hope we get that, but I'm going to go over 117. I don't think I'm going to go over 130 for him. But it's just, I think when you put that in perspective, 13 touchdowns, second most at the position, and he was wide receiver 16 per game. Makes you think. Okay, give me one more.
35th in targets per game too for Terry McLaurin. One more you said? How about Tee Higgins as an interesting regression candidate? He had 10 touchdowns in 12 games last year. Never had a rate like that before. We know that he was playing in a contract year, stepped up big time. 27% of his PPR fantasy points came from touchdowns. Does that come down a little bit? Does he not get as many touchdowns as he did in prior year or as he did last year? And he kind of goes back to being 7 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, and just not being as touchdown heavy as he was last year. A big difference between him and Terry McLaurin, obviously. Quarterback, I think Joe Burrow, we're all just completely trusting in him. Targets per game, Tee Higgins was 7th in targets per game among wide receivers last year. And he only played 12 games. That's why he didn't have 1,000 yards, but he was averaging 12.5 yards per catch. Can that number potentially stay where it is, or is that going to fall off just a little bit to further shrink his production from what we saw in 2024?
I think I'm okay with Tee Higgins at the 2-3 turn or near the 2-3 turn, Dave, because I do see some touchdown regression coming for sure. But, well, I guess I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think he could get to double-digit touchdowns again. I just feel like Joe Burrow, is he the most likely quarterback to lead the league in touchdown passes? I think you'd have to say yes, right?
Probably. Like I'm thinking about how he's the highest ranked non-running quarterback in my rankings. So I guess by that definition alone, he's got the best shot to get to like 40 touchdowns. Sure.
Yeah, I think he's definitely up there. I think he's the lead. I think he's got the shortest odds to lead the league in passing yards. I'm guessing touchdowns too. Sure. So I think it's pretty reasonable to hope for 10 touchdowns from Higgins, and they're going to be really good on offense. So I see the regression. He was one of our favorite values last year. He was going in round 5 or 6. Now you might have to take him in round 2. It's a little rich. Would you do it?
It is a little rich, but I'm not. I feel the same way you do. Like getting him at the 2-3 turn, especially if I'm in that range, late round 2, early round 3, and I took Saquon, Bijan, Gibbs with my first pick, I'm going to see so many wide receivers go off the board. I'm going to be a little bit nervous about missing out on other wide receivers that I would gravitate toward that position, and Tee Higgins will be one of the names that you'll see there. With Burrow last year, 43 passing touchdowns, almost 5,000 yards passing. He could very easily hit those numbers again as long as Chase and Higgins stay healthy. In fact, he would. Theoretically, he would have been over 5,000 yards if Tee Higgins had stayed healthy for 17 games.
And if Jamar Chase misses any time, Tee Higgins is probably to be a top 5 receiver. Yeah, could honestly be the number 1 receiver for those weeks.
Sure. So, like, I'm saying that he's a regression candidate based on the touchdowns. Please don't make it out to be like Tee Higgins is a bust and you should wait till round 9 to get him. We're not saying that at all. He's still a very good fantasy receiver.
Yeah, no, he was the number 5 wide receiver per game. He was 1/10 of a point away from being the number 4 wide receiver per game. So if you draft him as wide receiver 10, that's still a discount based on what Higgins did last year. Mm-hmm. All right, sir. Thank you very much. That's Dave Richard. I'm Aizer. I can't even say my name. I'm talking too fast. I'm Aizer. We'll talk to you tomorrow on Fantasy Football Express.